Today is your opportunity to be a part of the legislative process and to express your position on the proposed legislation before us. If you are planning to testify today, please fill out one of the green testifier sheets that are on the table in the back of the room. Be sure to print clearly and fill it out completely. When it is your turn to come forward to testify, give the testifier sheet to the page or to the committee clerk. If you do not wish to testify, but would like to indicate your position on a bill, there are also white sign-in sheets back on the table. These sheets will be included as an exhibit in the official hearing record. When you come up to testify, please speak clearly into the microphone. Please speak loudly as well. Tell us your name and spell your first and last name to ensure we get an accurate record. We will begin each bill hearing today with the introducer's opening statement, followed by the proponents of the bill, then opponents, and finally anyone speaking in the neutral capacity. We will finish with a closing statement by the introducer if they wish to give one. We'll be using a 5-minute light system for all testifiers. When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will be green. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light indicates you need to wrap up your final thought and stop. Questions from the committee may follow. Also, committee members may come and go during the hearing. This has nothing to do with the importance of the bills being heard. It is just part of the process that senators have bills to introduce in other committees. A few final items to facilitate today's hearing. If you have handouts or copies of your testimony, please bring up at least 10 copies and give them to the page. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. Verbal outbursts or applause are not permitted in the hearing room. Such behavior may be cause for you to be asked to leave the hearing. Finally, committee procedures for all committees states that written position letters to be introduced in the record must be submitted by 12 noon, the last business day before the scheduled hearing on that particular bill. The legislature's website, the only acceptable method of submission is via the legislature's website at nebraskalegislature.gov. You may submit a written letter for the record or testify in person at the hearing. You cannot do both. Written position letters will be included in the official hearing record, but only those testifying in person before the committee will be included on the committee statement. I will now have the committee members with us introduce themselves, starting on my right.
Good morning. I'm Senator Mike Jacobson, District 42. I represent Hooker, Lincoln, Logan, McPherson, Thomas, and 3/4 of Perkins County.
Tom Brandt, District 32, Fillmore, Thayer, Jefferson, Saline, and southwestern Lancaster counties.
Jana Hughes, District 24, Seward, York, Polk, and a little bit of Butler County.
John Kavanaugh, District 9, Midtown Omaha.
Mike Moser, District 22. It's Platte County and bits of Stanton County.
On my far left.
Oh, man. Okay.
Keeps it discussing. John Frederickson, District 20, which is in central west Omaha.
It's all ready to go. Julie Salama, District 1, Oto Johnson, Nemaha, Pawnee, and Richardson counties.
Sarah Mosier also serves as vice chair of the committee. Also assisting the committee today to my left is our legal counsel, Cindy Lamb, and to my far left is our committee clerk, Lori Volitson. Our page for the committee this morning is John Bonas. Thank you for being here and helping us. With that, we will begin today's hearings with LB 400. Senator Brewer, you're welcome to open.
Good morning, Chairman Wasselman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. I'm Senator Tom Brewer. For the record, that is TOMBREWER. I represent 11 counties of western Nebraska in the 43rd Legislative District. I'm here today to introduce LB 400. I'm introducing this bill on behalf of the district, but also game bird hunters across Nebraska. This bill is very similar to South Dakota's law that addresses the nesting or nest predators in order to restore the bird populations, namely the ring-necked pheasant. I've heard from a lot of Nebraskans. Many of them remember the days of old. If you go back and when I was younger, it was very common to do two things: listen to a Nebraska football game and go pheasant hunting. And back in the day, it really didn't matter where you were in Nebraska. You could find pheasants. And it was an event that was a family event that everybody did. And it was kind of that one activity that everybody came together for. What has happened over the years is, for a number of reasons, that population has dwindled. And now to find a pheasant in Nebraska is actually a bit of a challenge. This past year, I went near McCook and hunted there, went near Nebraska City, hunted there. Both places that I went to were locations where they stocked the birds. So there were birds available. Where we found our challenges is when we left the area that the birds were stocked and tried to just hunt. And what we found is that there just isn't a population left to speak of. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't pockets tucked away somewhere, but the problem is that if you have a young hunter who is interested and you force him to walk miles and miles and he never sees a bird, there's a point where they have no desire to hunt anymore. And that's sad that we've got to the point where it's that way, because it's an activity that should be something that there's a reward for the effort that's put in, and we're not there. And the idea of this bill is to figure out how to get us there. So if you take a look at the bill and how it is designed, it is simply a way that we can reduce the predator population so that we can reestablish the pheasant. Now, I did not include a mandatory release of pheasants in here, although I think that needs to be part of the discussion today. Now, last year was a one-off because of bird flu and some issues like that. But what I used as a barometer to try and figure out whether we're doing things right was trips to both South Dakota and Kansas to hunt. And this wasn't paid hunting areas. This is areas that individuals had that just had an established population. And it wasn't so much the fact that it was a great hunt, but it was an eye-opener to see the number of people wearing orange, people that were at the gas station, people at the restaurant, people were at the hardware store, people that were there staying at hotels. If you don't think it's an economic driver, I recommend you take a trip and see what they're doing. So we're losing in that we're not giving our youth the opportunity to become hunters and instill that spirit in them. I believe we're negatively affecting families just because some of the reasons that we all came together, we're not doing that anymore. And then we're losing out on the economic development, the tourism, all these things that should be a part of what we have here in Nebraska. We've got all of the right capability as far as land and open country. Some of this is due to the availability of ag ground and the fact that we're trying to farm every inch we possibly can. But I think there's got to be a way to manage the predators, because as you narrow the opportunities for the birds to have places to be, makes it just that much easier for coyotes. They can walk fence lines and hit these spots. Hides are no longer worth anything. So there used to be a desire to go and hunt them because you could make money on the side. Without that, there isn't the continued hunting of these predators. So as the predators get more and more, the pheasants get fewer and fewer, it's a death cycle that we can't get out of unless we do something fundamentally to change it. Now, we've had enough years of going the other way. We've got to figure out how to turn that around. And I think that having a way to have a take on these predators, to take them out of that cycle, and some of these, what we call nesting predators are worse than others. I mean, a lot of folks love on a raccoon, but if you ever seen what a raccoon can do to nesting birds, it's pretty devastating. Will we ever get back to the 70s? Maybe not. But if others can do it, i.e. South Dakota and Kansas, we need to look at what we can do to at least get closer. We may never be them, but we got to do better. And that's the idea behind this bill. So I guess at this point, the other thing I'll share is if you're not familiar with how the government trapper program works, we do have government trappers. There's only a handful. They're essentially paid by the counties. It's kind of an unfunded mandate on the counties. I think we have to take a look at the possibility of having a trapping program as a part of Game and Parks, because the desire on the federal government is to get out of that business, and they will put that burden completely on the counties, and I don't think that's fair. So that is another area that has to be addressed as part of this bill. So a government trapper is essentially the lowest paid person that can be a federal employee. I think they're GS4. And they're given no benefits, no health, no dental, no nothing. They're simply given a vehicle, traps. I think they get a gun and shells, and that's about it. And then the counties pick up a lot of this cost. And this situation with the government trappers, I believe, will end soon, and that will leave us with no one to hunt them. So if we don't have the public hunting them, because there's no value in them, and we don't have any way for them to be managed by the government, this situation will only continue to spiral out of control. Back to the point of this bill and why we have to come up with some type of solution, not only to reestablish the pheasant population, but to be able to let them stay. Because we could turn loose a couple million pheasants, but if they're all eaten, we're no better off than we were. Now, will this require maybe a step up each year as we can reduce some of the predators? Maybe, but it has to be a combined effort, and that's what LB 400 is about. So I will take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Other questions from committee members? Senator Slomo.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman, and thank you, Senator Brewer. I appreciated you mentioning South Dakota and Kansas. Could you walk us through what South Dakota and Kansas are doing right? Did they have a depredation framework for coyote hunting, removal of those predators, or are they doing something else?
No, they do have. Matter of fact, that's how we fashioned the bill, was using some of their actual verbiage. The amount that you give per predator can vary. They buy, and I think there'll probably someone from Game Parks that can talk numbers, but they buy pheasants. To my knowledge, they don't raise them and release them. They're actually buying them from commercial folks. But I think a hard look needs to be at how do they do it as far as when do they release them so that they're out and able to get into a cycle of nesting and survival. Because I think a lot of this is all about timing. If you're not killing the predators at that right cycle during the year to prevent them from just raiding the nests when they're trying to nest in the spring, then you're probably, in a self-defeating cycle there. South Dakota, I think, will freely admit that they have birds they turn loose that probably are eaten by coyotes. But if you're in a cycle where you release enough of them, especially on public ground, and they have cover, and if you look, there's more cover on public ground because we're not trying to plow it day and night. So you can release them there, and they have a fighting chance of survival. And maybe you do only have one of 4 that survive, but then over a cycle of years, you get them to become wild birds, because the ringneck pheasant was never natural to Nebraska anyway. They've been implanted. So I just think that we have to come up with a better plan to figure out how to reduce predators and increase the release of the pheasants into the population.
And just for anybody who's not as familiar with this, one coyote, one raccoon can easily destroy an entire nesting area, several nesting areas, in fact.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions, Senator Brandt?
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you, Senator Brewer, for bringing this bill. There's parts of this I really like. And I guess I've got several questions. Where does the money come from? You're authorizing 50,000 kills in here times $10. That's $500,000.
Well, I think that without having visibility on Game and Parks budget, I can't, automatically say it should be Game and Parks that picks up that fee. I think that in order to get it established, it may be that we have to take it out of general funds, at least initially, to get the program going, and then they pick it up and run with it once, the predator kill is at a level that's reasonable, so we can increase population and not have one destroying the other.
And then I guess the second one is implementation. So we've got a date here where they can redeem. I mean, are we doing ears, tails, whole carcasses? How does this work?
Well, that I think we can determine. I think the more common one they've been using is tails, just because ears. You got 2 ears, and a little harder to count them. And some will say, well, yeah, but what if they use road kills? Well, if the population is so great that you're getting road kills, I don't know that it's a big deal if they throw one of those in once in a while, because that's the reality of things, is you have so many that you're actually having them forced on the highways and things like that.
And I guess the last thing is, as one of these farmers that farms fence row to fence row, we do have some opportunities out there. In southeast Nebraska, we used to grow milo. Milo is the greatest crop ever for pheasants, and we don't do that anymore for economics, but we can do small food plots in the center of the sections where it's tough to turn the equipment around anyway. I mean, there's opportunities here. If there were, I'd like to see an incentive program to create habitat, maybe coupled with this, but maybe that's too big of an ask.
Well, I guess the concern was that if we make it too big, that it might die a death because it's too big, where if we could kind of start working our way to a positive end and build on it, then we might have a chance then. I would love to think that there was some way to bring back the CRP ground, but those programs don't pay enough to allow you to pay your property taxes and be ahead. So that has kind of, either that program needs to give back more in compensation, or else it probably isn't realistic.
All right, thank you.
Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman. Senator Brewer, I guess my question would be, do you know what efforts Pheasants Forever are doing? And is there a way we can get more collaborative effort here to fund this program? It would seem to me they would be at the top of the list of people with I guess, a dog in the fight or a pheasant in the fight.
But they do have programs, and they have release programs. Their part would simply be maybe being able to throttle up the number of pheasants released. The predator part, I think, has to fall on us. I don't know who else would really give the authority to be able to go and do that. But yes.
And I'm thinking more in terms of the funding side.
Well, I have not asked them if they had spare money. I mean, what they do a lot of course, is trying to take smaller plots and make them available and then release into that. But to do a statewide program and to incorporate the predators, I guess, is why we didn't really have them as a player in writing the bill.
No, thank you.
Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for comment, Senator Brewer. Was there a study done that proves that the population went down because of the predator, or is it, because I've always heard, and this is my neck of the woods, that it's the lack of habitat. It's the farming, and we get every grain off the ground, and so there's a lack of food source and a little bit lack of habitat. I mean, do we know, you know what I'm saying? Do we know for sure this would address the issue? I guess.
If you're asking me if I did one, no, I have not. I mean, most of mine is just, life experience and seeing. I mean, if you go out at night with a thermal scope, which I assume everybody does,
Clearly,
you can see the movement. And if what you're seeing is 4 or 5 predators and nothing else, it's obvious that there is an incredible population. And I was out in your neck of the woods up. I'm a cook hunting and just talking to the landowners. Oh, I'm sorry. That's Senator Ibaugh.
that's Ibaugh. It's all right.
Well, if you keep going west, you get there. Anyway, the landowners are the ones that come back and kind of give you the best feed on what's happened over the years and what they've seen and what their challenges are. And so, I guess a lot of that was what I used, but I would say when game and parks come up, that's the folks that have the biologists. I may question the wisdom of their biologists sometimes, but I think they might have some answers that would be close.
Okay, and I want to just add to it. I'm really glad that, I could do a roadkill, take it in, because I've nailed a few in my time. My second question is kind of fun. So would nest predators like possums, whose gameplay is to play dead, be disproportionately affected by this? I feel like they'd be easier to.
Well, possums usually are a little better at hiding than the rest of them. And, well, I don't know. I don't know if possums are any easier to get. They're a little hard to come by, but they are more devastating than you think.
I'm just giving you a
All right.
Sarah Mosier.
So the upland bird stamp, you have to have that to hunt pheasants, right?
Yes.
Or what do they call it nowadays? Is there another term for it?
Game and Parks will be here and they get paid to know these things.
Okay, well, anyway, would it be possible to have a stamp that you'd sell for pheasant hunting that you could use to pay bounties for people who shot predators?
Well, it might be. We'd have to just kind of walk through that to see how that'd work, but that's a possibility. I mean, it's thinking
Maybe
out of the
pheasant
box.
hunters would gladly pay a few extra bucks or something to. And your bill doesn't change the rules on hunting predators.
No,
You still can't shoot them on somebody else's property.
no.
You
You
can't
don't.
shoot them out of
No, you
your
don't.
car.
No, that.
Maybe that's the rule you should
Shoot 'em out
change.
of the truck.
Right. No, well, no, I think once you start on other people's property without permission, there's no good end to that. But I think if you have an incentive, at least pay for the gasoline to go out and spend the time doing it or the ammunition.
Yeah.
Then,
But you can't hunt on road right away like we used to.
no, for some reason, the people who wear guns and badges get very narrow-minded about that.
It used to not be a problem. We used to. do
Well,
it.
pretty sure it would be if you did it, but you can ask Game and Parks. They have people with guns and badges that do those kind of things, so.
Well, we don't want to start another fight. We got enough here. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, stay for closing, Senator Brewer.
You betcha.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to have a proponents for LB 400. Please step forward. Any proponents, please come up to speak. I would think we're probably going to have a few people speak today. So as a proponent or opponent, when we get to that point, start moving forward to populate the front rows to kind of move things along a little bit quicker. So with that, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. My name is Michael Herring. It's Michaelherring. I live in just south of Fremont, Nebraska. I'm here as a proponent because I've been a hunter and a trapper most of my life. And what we're seeing out there now is devastating to the bird population. It's also devastating to the cattle industry. We have people that are calling us to come hunt coyotes because they're after their dogs, their chickens, their cats. We have one farmer by Valley that's lost 10 calves. So figure out how much money he's lost. And this is to coyotes. Now, the other aspects of the predators that they want to get rid of, right now, there is no market for furs because of what's going on overseas. Everything that's pretty much trapped and shot in the United States went to Russia and China and Europe. Well, with everything that's going on, there is no fur market. I hunt with a bunch of guys. We spend $60 to $70 a weekend on gas and ammunition to take out these predators. I have about 40 landowners that have given us permission to hunt. And like I say, when you start seeing that these people are calling you because they're missing their cats and their dogs, and they will kill dogs. The coyotes will kill dogs. And like I say, you have the skunks and the raccoons that carry distemper and rabies. So as this population gets bigger, we're gonna start having more problems. And I think that these people, back in the 60s and 70s, there was a coyote bounty program that stopped, and that was for $2 an ear. And I'll say right now, none of these furs are worth anything. I've got friends that are trappers, and they're throwing them in a creek because it's not worth anything. But they're killing deer fawns. I mean, it's changing the whole atmosphere out there.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Senator Hughes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thanks for coming in, Mr. Herring. So when the farmers call you, are they hiring you to do this, or they're just giving you the permission to hunt on their?
They're giving us permission, and people are calling us to come out because they know we hunt them.
And then, my question then is, would that $10 per bounty make a difference, you think?
Not to me, because
you're
I
still
want,
gonna
but
do
I
it.
want to eliminate them.
Yeah.
But to other people that might get more of the hunters and trappers back out and help control the population. In the past 3 years, we've eliminated over 200 coyotes. And we're just talking probably a 20 square mile or 30 square mile area around Fremont.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions from committee? Seeing none, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you very much.
The next proponent, please. Next proponent for LB 400. Morning, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Bosselman and Senators of the Natural Resources Committee. John, John, Ross, ROSS. I am testifying for myself. Senator Brewer, thank you for introducing LB 400. For 60 plus years, I have hunted and farmed land that has been in the family since 1917. As Nebraska was settled, the prairie grass disappeared in eastern Nebraska. This led to the disappearance of the sharp-tailed grouse and prairie chicken from the eastern regions of the state. In 1911, Nebraska Game and Fish started stalking pheasants. That turned out to be a great decision. Wish I could shake the hands of the commissioners at that time. After the pheasant was stalked in the new habitat, they flourished. In 1927, the first pheasant hunting season was held. It was for 3 days in October. The daily bag limit was 3. Fast forward to the 1960s, when I started hunting. Pheasants, quail, rabbits, and squirrels were all on the farm. There was a large number of pheasants. In 1962, the pheasant hunting season was 86 days. Estimated 1.5 million roosters were bagged. This was the peak of the harvest of the soil bank era. With the loss of habitat and low numbers of pheasants, I don't understand why we have a longer season today. I was lucky to be able to hunt pheasants during the peak of the pheasant numbers. It did not take me very long to become a good enough hunter to bring home a bag limit of pheasants almost every time I hunted, along with other game. It was then that my mother taught me conservation. I was limited to 3 shells. That only made me a better hunter. Many times I still came home with 3 birds. She finally said, "You have to leave some for next year." And she closed the season. In 1972, I took over the farming on our family farm. The soil bank days were over. The habitat was still pretty good, so there was still a fair number of birds. As farming began to change a lot, the habitat changed just as fast. There was very little good habitat for pheasants left. During the late 70s and 80s, fur prices were very high. There were huge numbers of predators harvested. We had predator control. And I was part of that control, but I'm unable to do it now. When the fur prices dropped to almost nothing, there was very little predator control. The number of pheasants on my farm really dropped and have not come back, in spite of me adding habitat. I have taught hunter education for many years. Today, the course teaches that hunting is used as an effective wildlife management tool. It helps balance the number of animals to the carrying capacity of the habitat. We used to teach that in good habitat, predator control is seldom effective. We don't have very much good habitat left. Predator control should be used as a management tool that would help balance the number of predators to the number of prey in the habitat. Game and Parks needs to have the tool of predator control to use. I'm asking you to please advance LB 400, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions from committee members? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for your testimony today. I can remember growing up, they used to have wolf hunts where the whole community, and maybe this is kind of unique to Southeast Nebraska, but after a snow, the community would start on a township 6 by 6 and basically walk to the center and harvest any coyotes is what they were after at that time. Do you think programs like that, or what kind of incentives do you think we need out there to get more people to go after these predators?
I participated in some of those same hunts, Senator Brandt. I think this is probably something that needs to be worked on. It could be advertised. There is a little bit of a safety factor in that, as you know, but the hunts that I participated in, it was shotguns only with small bird shot. So it was pretty safe. The bounty would help people offset some of the costs.
All right, thank you.
Other questions, committee? Seeing none, would like to recognize Mr. Ross. I believe you were recently recognized as a master hunter educator for the state of Nebraska. Is that right? Or
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you very much for what you do for the education you provide our young folks.
I was at the conference and had no clue that I was designated master hunter ed instructor for the entire state of Nebraska.
Thank you very much.
This is a passion of mine.
Thank you, sir. With that, we'll ask the next proponent. Please step forward.
Oh, thank you.
I live in her district.
Fantastic. Thanks for stopping in.
My name is Ken Lamb. Thank you, Senator Bosselman and Natural Resources Committee. I have the same experience Senator Brandt. Got to participate in some of those.
Sorry, spell your name, please.
Kenlamb.
Thank you.
I had the same opportunities he did, on the hunt like they did with the surrounded sections. And I've been a pheasant hunter all my life. I graduated from the University of Nebraska with a degree in natural resources, wildlife management. I worked for the Department of Environmental Quality for 43 years, traveled east half of Nebraska, working with livestock operations. So I've traveled extensively, and all my business was working with farmers and feeders. So I'm very familiar with the community. And I've been heavily involved in Pheasants Forever and implementing CRP programs as I was a native grass driller on the side, because I've always farmed besides my job. I live in Otoe County between Syracuse and Dunbar. And Senator Sloman I've never met. We
We're
don't live very
neighbors.
far apart.
Yeah.
We're about 7 miles apart, I think. But I've been heavily involved with that. Drilling of native grasses for the last 25 years. I had 220 acres of CRP on my own land for 20 years. And we started breaking it out when we hit $7 corn. So $7 corn was one of the big factors in reducing CRP land. I still have 70 acres of CRP. Most of mine is in pollinator species that was in high demand for CRP. But you used to be able to go out and I could see 20, 30 pheasants within a couple hours. And now I saw one last fall, and I think he was just on a trip trying to find some buddies to hang around with because we have very few pheasants. And I have a different angle. I have grandchildren that live near me, 3 boys, 14 to 16. And esports, if any of you know what esports are, that's their participation, playing in electronic games. I've tried to get them to shoot. There's not much interest. They've done it a little bit. One of them's gone through the hunter safety program with Pheasants Forever and shot his first bird last year, but he's so busy with school and sports, it's hard to get him involved. I think this would give him an opportunity for trapping maybe a little bit to get some youth involved. But right now, and I think there's other people involved with Pheasants Forever see it, it's really hard to get those kids involved anymore. It's like Senator Brewer said, they go out there and walk and don't see anything. And they're so used to this instantaneous response with a computer that, to keep them interested is very hard to do. So that's, I think this could help in 2 different angles, from help boost the population a little bit and help maybe get some youth involved. I don't have any more if you have any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Salama.
Mr. Lamb, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you both for your work getting our youth involved and on the preservation side as well. From your experience in Southeast Nebraska and Otoe County, and I must admit, I'm relatively new to Otoe County. I'm more northeastern Nemaha County. What's the coyote population like? What's the predator population like?
I don't get to hunt a lot on coyotes. We didn't have very good weather this winter. A year ago, we went 3 days when we had good snow and we killed 26 in 3 days. And we lost some.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of coyotes out there. Now, I do have a neighbor, he has twin boys about 10 years old, and he asked me to go down to my pond and hunt frogs last summer.
Mm-hmm.
Next night he called me and he said, we went down there and he's got a thermal scope, shined it across the pond. It says 20 sets of raccoon eyes down there. And I said, well, I think we need to start trapping probably, but birds don't have much of a chance when there's that kind of a predator base.
No, there's really not. And that's a problem I see across the region too. And I'm sure across the state is the same problem. So thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Sarah Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Bosselman. Thank you, Mr. Lamb, for being here. And I really appreciated Senator Brewer's opening. I actually might surprise some. I've been pheasant hunting in my lifetime with families. So, but my question for you is, can you enlighten us a little bit about, so you mentioned kind of the amount of coyotes, the amount of raccoons, for example. How does this compare to historically what predator bases have looked like? Are we seeing kind of unprecedented rises in
Well,
this?
I think the lack of trapping and no market for furs.
Yeah.
I mean, there used to be a lot of guys I knew in the area that trapped all the time, and a lot of those people are aged out.
Mm-hmm.
And then the new people, recruiting new people to do it's kind of tough. If there's no price for them, even if you got $5, it's hard to go out and spend your time doing that.
So would it be safe to say that we're seeing increases in the
because
population?
there's nothing that's, I'm sure coons have a few predators, but coyotes probably kill a few coons, but coyote's kind of an apex predator in our area.
Right.
There's not much other than man that's going to get him. I know guys that trap them. It's very hard to trap.
Mm-hmm.
I've called a few in when I'm deer hunting, but I don't see that many when I'm hunting deer. But they get call smart real fast.
Sure.
But
Thank you.
okay, I know Senator Brandt
questions?
remembers me, but I was at his farm about 25 years ago.
Senator Brandt.
Don't go anywhere.
Sir.
Okay.
Ken?
Okay, yes. Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for your testimony. Habitat destruction. If the state of Nebraska would not assess the CRP land or the habitat land at a cropland value, Therefore, you have a high assessment. It doesn't pay to keep it in there. I don't want to say you're forced to grow crops, but economically it makes sense. If we would create another category of wildlife habitat possibly and assess it at nothing, do you think that would incent landowners to put more acres into wildlife habitat?
I think the economics are still there for corn and beans. I mean, I did it because I enjoy hunting. If you looked at my farm, it's pretty woolly because I've got 70 acres of CRP scattered out across 1.5 miles. I've got 3/4 of a mile of hedgerows. Everybody else is tearing their hedgerows out. I keep mine. I harvest a few posts here and there, but that's about it. But to keep people, to get back into CRP, they have to be competitive with the cash rental rates. I got some back in at $180 in this pollinator species. And it was incentive to me. Some of that's poor ground. Some of it shouldn't be broke out. And some of it, when it does come out, I'm going to leave it as pasture. I'm not going to break it back up.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Next proponent, please, for LB 400, step forward.
Good morning, Chair Bostelman. My name is Spike Eichel, SPIKE-EICK-HOLT. I'm here on my personal capacity. I talked to Senator Brewer yesterday about my interest in this bill, and I told him I think I'd like to support it, and I hope that was a good choice. I am an avid bird hunter. That may be surprising, similar to what Senator Frederickson mentioned. I do it regularly. I've done it for most of my life. There was a time where I didn't do it, maybe when I started going to college, because it wasn't cool. I was into other things, but I got back in it when I got out of law school, and I really appreciated it. I don't want to just give anecdotes, but I remember when I first was living in Lincoln after I got out of law school, it was easy for me to zip out and hunt one of these public areas and at least get a couple of shots off at a rooster. At that time, I'd be down in Senator Slama's district fairly regularly because it was really good hunting opportunities down there near Cook, near Syracuse, south of those areas. And then I remember hunting around Brainerd area. There's a whole series of public hunting areas because I usually hunt public land because I'm not really from Nebraska originally, so I don't really have access to private land. A whole series of areas by that old sort of shut down along Highway 92. It's like the Rays Inn or something like that. It's a shut down place. I stopped going down to Senator Slama's district. I stopped going to the Brainerd area because the birds just weren't there. And now we have to go clear up to north central, northeast Nebraska. I hunt with several friends to get anywhere. And that has a consequence. Bird numbers are low. And I like that Senator Brewer introduced this bill because even though this may not be the solution, it's a partial solution and it at least elevates this issue to the state legislative level. There's been some talk before about what this means for Nebraska. If people can't get action on birds, for lack of a better word, they just don't go hunting. There's a significant economic loss that the state is missing out on. I've been up to South Dakota a few times. I even pay for the out-of-state license and everything. They actually aggressively market their pheasant hunting. It's sort of almost, I find it personally maybe too aggressive in the sense that they do it, but they make money off of it. For instance, you can't start hunting until noon early in the season or 10 in the morning. So then what are you going to do? You're going to go get a breakfast somewhere with all your friends. So the businesses benefit that way. You have to stay in a hotel room. The non-resident licenses are good for 14 days, but you have to take a break. So they have to encourage you to come back for multiple trips and spend that much more money. There's nothing wrong with that. They've got birds up there. It's enjoyable, but it's a way that our state just never even looks at this. Our younger son hunted with me when his age is maybe 13 to 15, and then he just lost interest. And part of it, again, it wasn't cool. None of his friends were into it. But what Senator Brewer said is accurate. I don't go to those pay-to-shoot places. I only hunt wild birds on public land, and I hunt other things besides pheasants. And I wanted my son to experience that as well. And it is a tough ask to have a 14-year-old kid carry a gun and walk in CRP fields for 3 hours for one desperate, hurried shot, because that's the only rooster you're going to see that day. And it's difficult to get them to have interest in doing that. What does that matter? We've had bird numbers that are low for, I'd say, the last 5 years at critical low levels, maybe 3 years. And I don't really see them getting better anytime in the future. You've got a whole generation that is not experiencing this sport. That's something that Games and Parks should be concerned about, I would respectfully suggest, because they are a fee-funded agency. Senator Moser asked about fees. I pay on a hunt license fee. There's a habitat fee. There's a wetland fee. There's, if you buy a fishing license, there's another fee that's on there. We don't mind doing that. But if you don't have anyone who's interested in pursuing the sport, they're not going to pay the fee. They're not going to buy a hunting license. They're not going to pay for those things. So the revenue goes down. Most of the lakes and public areas in the state have been paid for, at least in part, by the money generated from those fees. So we are missing out on a generation that has interest in this sport. I think that there are other suggestions to be out there besides the predator bounty program. One obviously is habitat. Although I would submit we have some very good looking habitat areas down here. They look great. It looks very diverse. The switchgrass looks great. The pollinators are there, but there's just no birds. It could be the pesticides and spraying practices that we have. It could be the way that we mow ditches. It could be the assessed value that we have on land that's to encourage landowners to not farm everything from fence row to fence row. And one other thing that I know South Dakota does, it's permissible for South Dakota and not uncommon for landowners to charge people a daily rate just to hunt on their property for wild birds. I'm not talking about the pay to shoot places. We just don't have that mentality here. And I don't know if there's something in the law that can be resolved to change that. I think stocking of pheasants might be helpful as well. As Senator Brewer said, pheasants are not native. They were released and stocked here. Now I know that habitat conditions are different and farming is different back then, but we also had a stocking program for turkeys that were naturally native to Nebraska. They were mostly wiped out for the state, but the Gaines of Park implemented a plan, and now we have a fairly good population of turkeys around the state. So I don't know that should be discounted. Hopefully Gaines of Park will see this as an opportunity and others, and I would encourage the committee to consider and support this bill. I'll answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosman. Thank you, Mr. Eichholt, for being here. So we've heard about how good Kansas and South Dakota are, and you talked about your experience in South Dakota. Do they do stocking in South Dakota?
They do some. What you see in South Dakota, they have a lot of these hunting lodges where it's like these mega ranches and mega farms where they are fairly big places. They usually have a lodge where hunters can stay. And they regularly release birds to supplement their wild populations. Games and Parks in this state has had a release plan or program a couple times around Thanksgiving and for the youth hunts. They have an early season youth hunt where kids under 16 can hunt. They've released some pheasants there. Those are released the day or two before the season opens. I would submit, and maybe somebody can speak to it, I bet those birds have a relatively low survival rate because they're pen raised and they're let go, and a matter of like 12 or 24 hours later, they're being shot at. But I think you could have a stocking program. I know up in South Dakota, some of these places, they release birds, both hens and roosters, throughout the year at different ages of the birds in an attempt to somehow acclimate them to living wild and supplement the population. I didn't go to South Dakota this year. My friends did, and they said they saw significantly more birds than Nebraska had, even though they have, just like Nebraska, they have experienced drought this year, which probably had an impact on populations in both states, but they did see more birds up there.
Follow-up question. So this might be a crazy idea in this context, so nobody take it out of. What if we didn't hunt them for a year or so? Like with that?
As far as pheasants, I don't think, I would submit it doesn't have any impact. Hunting does not have any impact on them. First, you only can harvest the roosters, and they're easily recognizable from the hens. They're more colorful, they're slightly bigger, they got a white ring. They're polygamous birds, so you only need, say, one rooster. Generally speaking, if you have a successful nest hatch, right, you have equal numbers of hens and roosters. So you always have a surplus of roosters that you don't necessarily need to preserve the population the following year. So, and there's probably biologists that can speak to that. Perhaps, and I think the last speaker or speaker before mentioned that Nebraska season for pheasant starts usually last weekend of October all the way to the end of January. I don't know how many people bother hunting in January, and if there's going to be a proposal to maybe shorten the season, I would respectfully suggest they not have it all the way to the end of January, only because weather conditions are so bad. If you are hunting, you're pressuring all the birds that are there to expose them to the elements of both hens and roosters that you might flush while you're walking an area will be exposed to the elements. And I don't know if there would be that much backlash or resistance from the hunting population if the season was to be closed toward the end of it, because I don't think respectfully many people hunt as much as they do in October and November.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sarah Mosier.
Do you hunt coyotes?
I have tried it a couple of times. I've got a call where you try to call them in and stuff, but I've never done an actual coordinated effort like some people do. And if I see one and it's within range, I certainly do that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next proponent for LB 400. Any other proponents? Now we'll move on to opponents for LB 400. Please step forward and Start populating the front rows, please. So. Morning.
Good morning, Chairman Bosselman, members of the Natural Resource Committee. My name is Alicia Hardin, ALICIAHARDIN. I'm the Wildlife Division Administrator from the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. The commission is opposed to LB 400. Our commission understands and appreciates the interest in trying to increase pheasant populations across the state. We also understand the increased interest in managing predators for the benefit of our ground nesting birds, such as pheasants, especially with the lack of a fur market. It should be noted the most important factor for pheasant survival is habitat. Whether it is for nesting, brood rearing, escape, or winter cover, these different types of habitats are needed throughout the year. This bill, other factors that also have an impact on our ground nesting birds is weather conditions. Meeting ideal weather conditions during brood and nesting is very important as well. Not too dry, not too cold and wet. This bill focuses on destroying predators, badgers, coyotes, possums, raccoons, red fox, and striped skunks between March 1st and July 1st. There have been a number of studies that have looked at predator removal in relation to ground nesting birds over the years. Most conclude that predator removal at large landscape levels are rarely successful. They are hard to sustain, both monetarily and in effort, and often don't account for all the potential predators that are out there. It should also be noted that predators tend to alter their behavior and reproductive strategies to compensate for their reduced numbers. Other studies discuss the imbalance caused by taking only one type of predator. It releases others that aren't being then taken care of by the predators and the whole chain. In short, the dollars spent on habitat would have a much longer lasting impacts than paying for bounties. We have concerns with this program. Although it was not made clear in the bill where the funds will come from to pay for the bounty, if agency cash funds from the sales of permits for hunting and fishing are targeted, it would be considered a diversion of funds and would render the commission ineligible from further participation in the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Programs, or WSFR. That would be a loss of $22.8 million per year for our agency. It would also conflict with state statutes 37-901 and 903 as a diversion of funds. The bill also does not mention the cost of administering this program. Therefore, we have outlined the need for several positions in our fiscal note and would ask for additional appropriations to cover these expenses. Other concerns are the inability to prove that a tail turned in wasn't from a roadkill animal, something discussed earlier, or saved from a previous harvest. So what is the commission doing about pheasant management? We have recently updated our birdroom plan, which is our plan, our pheasant plan. The plan focuses on many aspects of pheasant hunting and also management, including habitat, access, research, and hunter recruitment. Since 2017, when we started our first birdroom plan, we've impacted more than 300,000 acres of pheasant habitat in 7 focus areas across the state. In relation to predators, we already have very long seasons that allow for unlimited take of this listed species in this bill. And in the case of the coyote and skunk, they are already allowed to be taken year-round. Residents can take coyotes without a fur harvest or small game license, something that actually is required in the bill. In conclusion, we oppose this bill, but we would be happy to work with Senator Brewer and the committee to discuss other options that would also meet the intent of this bill to increase pheasant populations. Thank you.
Thank you for testimony. Questions from committee, Senator Salamo.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman, and thank you so much for being here. Just a preview of future events, what are some things that you would recommend in your discussions with Senator Brewer as things the legislature could do to help restore the pheasant population?
I really kind of like this idea of maybe an incentive for people who want to go into CRP. That's been, habitat again is our big thing. lost, over half of our CRP acres. That's sort of the height of our pheasant boom in the 90s. And a lot of that's because we just don't, the rental rates aren't good enough in some areas and can't compete with some of the row crop farming. That might be a nice extra incentive. We also have other incentives that we provide landowners when we work with them on conservation of their own land. We did ask for an increase in funding for our bird room plan and in our appropriations bill, and the governor's bill that came out took most of that out. So it would be nice to have that money back to be able to match against all of these federal dollars to help provide more of those incentives and really focus in the areas where we can have the most impact on habitat.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair Bosman. Thank you for being here. So I had a question, kind of following up on that a little bit. So what I'm understanding from what you're saying is sort of the habitat preservation seems to be more effective than a bounty hunt per se. Is there a world where there's like both of these things kind of coexist in tandem and that's actually even more effective than strictly habitat preservation? Or can you educate a little bit on that? Or
Sure. Yeah. Some of the studies, especially when, there's been a lot of ground nesting bird studies with predators. Some of them are more waterfowl related. When they looked at some of those waterfowl programs where they had really good habitat, they had a good chunk of habitat, good nesting cover for the birds, and in conjunction were able to do some predator management, they did see some increase. But it really takes keeping your foot on the gas all the time on that. And that's expensive and really hard at a large landscape to be able to do. But in more of those smaller areas, in some cases, they were able to see an increase. So, but habitat first, then some predator management to maybe help in a little way. But again, balance is the key here. You can't take all of one thing and expect it not to impact all the other things that live out there too.
thank you.
Other questions? Senator Mosier's had to step out, but he talked about habitat stamp. So if you're a landowner, you do not have to buy have a habitat stamp hunt on your own land.
That's correct.
Go off your land, then you do, every hunter does. The other thing is the public, anyone can buy a habitat stamp. You don't have to be a hunter or trapper.
That's right.
And there's also the conservation stamp or opportunity, I think, when you file your taxes.
Right, the Wildlife Conservation
So
Fund.
there's several areas there that you can contribute to. So I would say the loss of habitat is significant. Well, as I grew up years ago, we would have, in Superior, we would have people from Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, from all over come and stay in the community. And because we had pheasant population, and now it's just not there anymore. So this is a key issue, I think, that good to take up. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
No other questions. Thank you. Next proponent, or opponent, sorry. Next opponent to LB 400. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Drew Larson, DREWLARSEN, and I'm here representing Pheasants Forever and our 60 chapters and approximately 10,000 members and supporters throughout the state. We certainly appreciate the effort to create tools to increase pheasant numbers in the state, and I certainly appreciate Senator Brewer's vision, and I share your vision, Senator Brewer, about robust pheasant populations that we had back in the 70s and 60s. However, science tells us that available habitat and weather are the two main factors that drive pheasant numbers, and this bill does not address either of those factors. We currently partner with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission to assist with habitat improvements on private and public lands throughout the state. And our concern that is proposed that the proposed bounty program inadvertently take funds from existing habitat programs that have been proven to increase pheasant numbers. Nebraska already has a robust trapping program, and we feel that a bounty program would not remove enough additional predators to make an impact on pheasant numbers. We would prefer to see the funds utilized for landowner incentives for habitat improvement instead of a bounty system. In summary, we know quality habitat works to protect birds during their entire life cycle. Habitat helps birds survive harsh winters, drought, wet springs during nesting, and also against nest predators. Unfortunately, the places we find the predators listed in LB 400 are generally also associated with invasive trees and planted windbreaks. When grassland is converted to cropland or invaded by trees, predators do well and upland game loses nesting habitat. This alone gives the impression that predators are the main culprit. And at the end of the day, we still need quality habitat on the landscape to support robust pheasant numbers. We appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and will be open to further discussions to increase pheasant numbers. As currently written, we respectfully decline LB 400.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from committee members? Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman. Mr. Larson, I guess my question would have to do with maybe understanding, I'm a landowner in Clay County. I share the concerns. We've lost pheasant habitat. I remember as a kid being a human dog, helping with with hunters that came in from out of state, and we had a robust pheasant population, and that's really dwindled significantly. Clearly, the economics today with $6 and $7 corn makes it a little more difficult to put too much into CRP at the rent rates. But I'm curious about these buffer strips, pivot corners, turn rows, that kind of thing. Is that helpful, or is that just, as was indicated earlier, perhaps making it easier for the predators when you look at 5-acre spots or 2-acre spots or something along that line? Is that productive? Is that helpful? Or are you really needing more vast areas of land in one chunk to make a difference? How do you see that in terms of habitat?
It's a great question, and a lot of it depends on what's kind of around and available next to the habitat that we're implementing. So a 5-acre pivot corner in the middle of Kearney County, where I grew up and where I'm from, the middle of corn, probably isn't going to do a great deal of good. But if it's next to a wildlife management area of 300 acres, then that could be super valuable in terms of pheasant production. So it really depends on where it's at and what's in proximity.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
Next opponent, please. Morning.
Good morning. My name is Laura Stastny, Laurastastny. I am the Executive Director of Nebraska Wildlife Rehab, a nonprofit organization serving people and wildlife throughout the state of Nebraska. I would first like to speak to the purpose of this bill, and some of this is going to repeat what you've already heard. Ringneck pheasants are not native to Nebraska. They're native to Asia and were introduced here in the late 1800s. For that reason, and to a point made in this bill, I would argue that they are not important to the ecology of Nebraska, which was noted in the bill. We do recognize, however, that they are important to our economy, in our hunting economy. Because they are not native to Nebraska, they did not evolve in this ecosystem, and that just may present them more challenges than some of our other wildlife in surviving naturally on their own. And in that way, they're not really analogous to the wild turkeys that we reintroduced to the state, because they are a native species. Studies have shown that predators are not the primary influence on game bird populations, on pheasant populations. The effect on their populations is due to a lack of large, suitable areas of uninterrupted habitat that is not subject to human disruption. And pheasants in particular, as Alicia noted, are more susceptible to unstable weather patterns. And of course, as we know, if there's one constant in Nebraska weather, it's unstable weather patterns. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Applied Ecology noted that when you're talking about avian ground nests, this was done on galliforms, so pheasants, quail, et cetera, that control of mesomammal predators, these mid-level predators in the area, did reduce their predation on those nests. It did. However, but when you remove those predators, other predators move in to predate the nest. So think like snakes, reptiles, birds, et cetera, such that total nest mortality was unaffected. So controlling those predators had no effect on ground nest success. We also know that bounty hunts do not significantly change numbers of these mid-level predators in an ecosystem. This is why bounty hunts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries did not work. They didn't work because these animals have strategies to replace their numbers when facing a bounty hunt or a controlled hunt. What we actually know is that large predators control mid-level predators better than any human can. So although it's controversial, allowing mountain lions and coyotes on our landscape actually controls raccoons and other mid-level predators better than humans can. And also, I'm not going to get into this, but coyotes are actually not a major egg nest predator. And also, bounty hunting and killing contests of coyotes actually doesn't work, and there are biological reasons for that I'd be happy to talk about if you'd like to ask about them. Due to the fact that all 3 points in the purpose of this bill are not based in fact, we oppose the bill on those grounds. In addition, this bounty season hunt is laid out from March through July. That is the breeding and young rearing season of all of these animals that are targeted in this bill. One of the principles of wildlife management is to allow wildlife to rear their young unmolested in some season. This maintains populations, and it's the right thing to do. A bounty during these months will leave thousands of orphaned baby mammals to starve to death in their dens. This is cruel, and it's completely unnecessary. As noted before, there's no economic value at this point in pelts. So if there's no value to the pelts, it doesn't have any value to the harvester. It doesn't actually help pheasant nest success, and it allows young to die a drawn-out death. I would propose that a bounty hunt is also immoral. Bounty systems are highly susceptible to fraud. There's no guarantee that people won't collect roadkill or even bring animals in from other states to collect our bounties. Bounty hunts also claim non-targeted species. In Nebraska, this could be the spotted skunk, the swift fox, and even birds of prey. Those animals will have young at nest too. Bounty hunts like these are not part of a coordinated wildlife management strategy. We have a dedicated team of biologists at Nebraska Game and Parks who we trust to monitor wildlife populations and set our policies. They already do a good job of taking their commitment to the wildlife and people of Nebraska seriously. And I feel like a bill like this ignores the trust that we have in that agency. I think that senators should allow them to set policy as they see fit when it comes to wildlife management in our state. I appreciate the chance to be here and talk to you all, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman. You made a comment that you think bounties hunting is immoral. So how do you feel about hunting?
I absolutely have no problem with hunting at all, and we are not an anti-hunting organization. We support hunters, especially hunters that are out there for food sustenance, and in fact, many of our own staff members and volunteers are hunters.
So how do you differentiate bounty hunting and game hunting?
Yeah, so specifically, I'm talking about the season here. And the season is during animal breeding season. So our regular hunting seasons are set for when there aren't babies at nest.
I get that part. I know you'd mentioned that it was immoral to do it. I mean, it wasn't humane to do this during the time of nesting, but then you made the statement after that you felt that bounty hunting was immoral. I just wanted to make sure.
In this context, I feel like it's immoral. Yeah.
That's what I wanted. Thank you.
Senator Hughes?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and thanks for coming in. Do you have any good ideas to try to increase habitat and things like that? Something that we haven't.
I'm encouraged by everything that I've actually heard so far. I do believe that incentivizing, and as a taxpayer, I am very pro my taxpayer dollars going into incentivizing landowners for habitat restoration. One of the issues that we have in Nebraska is we have less public land than a state like South Dakota or Kansas, where the state can dictate what happens on those lands. We have to work with private landowners in our state in order to ensure appropriate habitat.
Okay, thank you.
See no other questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Next opponent, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Bosselman, members of the committee. My name is Scott Smathers, SCOTT-SMATHERS, and I am the Executive Director of the Nebraska Sportsman's Foundation, a 501c3 here in the state of Nebraska with a 13,000 plus membership working on all outdoor resolution issues, hunting, fishing, and trapping. Like many of the before me, we applaud Senator Brewer in his desire to increase the pheasant numbers. I am a lifetime member of Pheasants Forever. I am a former Pheasants Forever employee. Needless to say, I remember those days also. I'll be 59 next month. And my fond memories of opening weekend breakfasts, camaraderie, and hunting birds. Unfortunately, I wasn't as lucky as sounds like some of these. I was forced to carry a single shot Harrington Richardson with a shell in my pocket the first year of my training. So many birds were left for growth. The reality of this bill, and the reason that our membership and our board has decided to oppose this bill, was a very difficult decision. We had a tremendous amount of debate over this bill because we'd like to see more pheasants on the landscape, obviously, all wildlife. However, we take objection to the funding source or lack of naming a funding source. And we understand that the $500,000 would most likely by the game parks be either absorbed through other programs, depletion, or passed on to sportsman permits. There comes a limit when sportsmen will stop buying permits at cost, and we keep dumping $5, $10, $15, $25 extras on permits. And the other issue we have is that with this bill is that there's no significant language in regards to the framework of the season. We already have an established fur bearer season and hunting seasons for these species. And as mentioned by the previous testifier, if you are a supporter of the North American model conservation, you are bound to abide by the tenets of not want and waste. And we feel that during this time of season for the fur bearer seasons, the hides are in lackluster condition. You are subjecting to the babies being left to die, which does not promote growth of the species. And so therefore, in habitat, you've heard the habitat is a key issue. I've been involved in a lot of habitat work privately on my own ground to a large sum of money that I've spent to control predators, put in habitat, and also public lands through a variety of different organizations I belong to. It is a key requirement. I keep hearing about South Dakota. I've been there many, many times. South Dakota is in transition at this present point with their pheasant hunting. They have a close to $1 million initiative right now to restore pheasant habitat in winter cover because they've had a tremendous loss the last 2 years in South Dakota due to winter. In fact, the Nebraska-born individuals that in charge of that, the South Dakota Habitat Fund. Brian Bashore is from Milford, Nebraska. He now lives in South Dakota. We speak frequently. It has not had the effect, this program in South Dakota, that everybody thinks it has had. There's a lot of pitfalls. It's one tool. We need to continue the conversation. I encourage Senator Brewer and others. I like Senator Brandt's idea in regards to taxing issues on recreational grounds or improvement grounds for CRP. There's a lot of avenues we can go. Last thing I'll say is that predator control is a difficult conversation for a lot of folks. Again, want waste, what do you do with the hides with no market? Like I said, I personally own a tremendous amount of ground in the state of Nebraska that I hunt. Senator Brewer would already owe me $500 for coyotes underneath this bill for this year on my land alone, which is an incentive for taxes. But the numbers continue to grow, as you heard from the previous testifier. They are smart. Coyotes are extremely smart. Raccoons are extremely smart. When you start taking them out, they find ways to avoid the opportunity to be removed. We welcome the chance to work with anyone, our partners behind us, Senator Brewer, any members of this committee, on increasing habitat, pheasants, and the number of participants. However, this current bill does not generate that direction. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next opponent to LB 400, please. Morning.
Morning, Senators. My name's Gerald Vinduska. It's Jarel. Vinduska is spelled Vinduska. Got a farm in Sarpy County, Nebraska, and I'm 72 years old, and in college, my degree is in wildlife management. And I remember about the first day in class in wildlife management classes, the one thing they stressed was if the habitat's right, the animals will be there. And that's the issue why I'm against this bill, is because, you know, I started pheasant hunting in the early 60s when I was a young teenager and have many fond memories of it because it was nice to always be guaranteed to see lots of birds. But the reality is that, and the reason I'm against this, is I hate government waste of money. And it's just unrealistic to think that that on a statewide basis, you can remove predators in vast areas of the state, which is probably 95% of the state, in which the habitat just isn't there. So there wouldn't be pheasants there anyway. So what point is there in killing animals that aren't the limiting factor? You know, saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Well, that's the same thing as in wildlife management or wildlife populations. If the habitat isn't there, and It's just not, the animals just aren't going to be there. And I'm not suggesting that nest predators don't have an impact on all ground nesting birds, including endangered species like the piping plover and least tern. In those instances, it can be devastating. But my point is that if you're going to use the kind of money resources we're talking about, you need to focus in specific areas where the habitat is there and where you have a chance of making a difference. So basically, you know, if you want, well, it's just like in Lancaster County here. When the settlers first came here, they used to kill prairie chickens by the wagon loads. Market hunters would just send them to town, you know. And why aren't there prairie chickens here now? Because there isn't prairie anymore. The only remaining ones are over by, where is it, Spring Creek Prairie over by Denton. There's a small population because there's a big prairie tract there. And the only way you're going to bring pheasants back the way they were in the 50s and 60s and 70s is if we farmed like we did back then. So if you really want to blame something for getting rid of pheasants, it's Roundup and Roundup ready crops. In those years, you know, now there's no weeds and because there's no forbs, you don't have the insects anymore that used to inhabit those weeds. When you'd hunt back then, the whole cornfield would be habitat. There'd be weeds in amongst the corn stalks. So a pheasant can have the whole field, the whole landscape to go around, and he could avoid predators and he could pick up grain everywhere. But no pheasants nowadays is going to walk out in the middle of 160 acre bare ground with just a few stalks sticking up. He can only work the edges. So my point is, it's just a waste of money, and that money should be put toward habitat improvement or predator control in specific zones where it can do some good. But like I say, I can give you an example. On our farm, it's prime turkey habitat, and the surrounding farms are prime habitat. And about 8 years ago, I could go out in the winter when they were bunched up in the best areas and be over 800 birds out in the field. Well, 8 years ago, the coyotes were infested with mange, dying like crazy. The raccoons and skunks had distemper. They died off like crazy, and the birds were thick then. And now we're down to, now the raccoons are healthy and all the other, no distemper. And well, anyway, I'll make a long story short, but now we're down to about 100 to 120 birds. So that's the only thing that's changed. But sure, I can control the predators on my land, but eventually those diseases are going to come back and those predators are going to die off, and then the bird population will start going up again because the habitat is right. But if the habitat wasn't there, there wouldn't have been that many birds to begin with. So anyway, if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Questions from committee members? Saying none, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Next opponent, please.
Good morning, Senators. Thank you. My name is Scott Leckteig, SCOTT-LICKTEIG. Our farm in Nemaha County is entirely in CRP in an effort to increase the population of wildlife, fur bearers, deer, and game birds. I am an outdoorsman. I am a hunter, fisherman, and trapper for nearly 50 years. All these hobbies work together to make me a wildlife conservationist. LB 400 is not the means to increase the pheasant population from a management perspective. The proposed bounty on fur bearers during the primary nesting season of pheasants is contrary to the birthing season of fur bearers. The offset of the depredation of fur bearer mothers in an effort to reduce the nest rating of pheasants is not equitable and does not ensure an increase in the pheasant population. Trapping and hunting seasons as established by Nebraska Game and Park have been carefully determined to allow for the wise management of fur bearers and other game animals. These seasons create a rational means for the harvesting of fur bearers during times when the females are not having litters and when the fur is prime, meaning the value of the fur is optimal. Paying the bounty during the already established seasons could help to offset the poor fur prices and have increased participation. In my many years of fur trapping, this is the worst market we have ever had. There is no scientific proof that these later bounty seasons will increase the pheasant populations. It will create a waste of the fur resource in the state. There are currently designated wildlife management areas established within the state. If LB 400 is passed and a bounty on nest raiders is approved, these wildlife management areas should be the focus of the bounty harvest rather than having open access throughout the entire state. Unfortunately, there is a very realistic possibility that the bounties claimed will not come from the areas that even have pheasants or the possibility of a nesting area. As outlined in LB 400, this proposal would have a massive financial impact on the Game and Parks Commission for a total of $500,000 annually. How will the commission pay for this program? The cost would need to be absorbed as a budget line item, creating the necessity to eliminate positions within the commission, reduce other programs, or pass the cost along to all permit holders. My final point would be the limited areas available for harvest during this time of year. With field work starting for the planting season, the most accessible area for trapping these targeted predators will be road ditches. The legality of trapping in road ditches is determined by each county. It is a very real possibility of creating poor public perception of the program when the public drives by and sees animals sitting in traps and road ditches or hanging from a fence, all for the purpose of securing a bounty. Neither fur harvesters nor the Game and Parks Commission need this sort of media attention. Current farming practices have eliminated a large number of grass waterways and fence lines that were prime nesting areas for pheasants and other game. Without much habitat, no reduction in predators will create an increase in the pheasant numbers. Thank you for your time and your opportunity.
Thank you for your testimony or questions from committee members. Seeing none, thank you for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Next opponent, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Katie Torpy, here today representing the Nature Conservancy. KATIE-TORPY. We support a science-based approach to wildlife management. As many have identified here today, nest predators are not the driving source of low pheasant populations. Land use change is far and away the biggest cause of reduced pheasant population. The increased fragmentation of our grasslands and the related increase in woody encroachment, such as eastern red cedar, leads to more woody habitat for the mesopredators and to smaller parcels of habitat for the pheasant. This means those predators have smaller grassland patches to search through for nests and birds. High annual losses of pheasants to predators should not be misconstrued to mean that predation is the driver when the cause of those predator numbers are equally driven by habitat structural change. We support the existing fur bearer seasons established by the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. Were this legislation to move forward, we would request that program operation be limited within the existing season. Further, we would request that any version of this legislation omit inclusion of coyotes. Suppression of this species, as others have described, is an especially fraught practice with cascading consequences known and unknown. Coyote suppression has been shown to have impacts on the populations of many other species. As just one example, one research project showed that coyote population reductions had a negative impact on the diversity of small mammals, but increased jackrabbit numbers significantly, which then competed with livestock for forage. Thankfully, well-designed habitat projects can reduce predation by up to 80%. The most immediate means by which to improve pheasant population would be simply to allocate more resources to cost share programs and that support habitat improvements on private land. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for coming in. Next opponent for LB 400, please step forward.
Good morning, Senator Boston, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Al Davis, ALDAVIS. I'm here to testify as a registered lobbyist for the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club. I think everything has been pretty well said by people behind me, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about some anecdotal observations that I've made. I've been around a long enough time that I do have some knowledge about the birds. So the first comment I want to make is maybe surprising to everyone in this room, but we did have a large number of pheasants in the sandhills in the 70s and when I was a kid. That's not grain country at all, but there were a significant flocks of pheasants. We had a terrifically bad winter in 78, 79. Probably many of you heard about the infamous year of 78, 79. And after that, the pheasants were gone. That winter just took them out and they were never able to rebuild their numbers. So there are a few little isolated spots around INS where there's down by lake bottoms where there's a few pheasants, but I do think weather plays a huge part in this, and obviously that's out of our control. So you've heard a lot of references to habitat, and we know how farming has changed significantly. We've lost all the fence rows, all the trees that used to be there. And then one other change that's taken place is, farming equipment is so much more efficient than it used to be. So it picks up all the grain that's there. So there's not as much forage out there for them to eat and not as much grain. We have to fix the habitat problem. If we're going to do anything here, I think that's the solution that we need to go. The last point I'm going to make has been said earlier, but when you eliminate predators on the top, you end up with more animals below that are not consumed. And so mice and rats are one example of that are consumed by coyotes and other creatures. So if we have a bounty program like this one, we're going to see more and more mice and rats, and those animals also are egg eaters. So I just think this is a well-intentioned bill, but not a solution. Habitat is the solution, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any other opponent, please step forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. For the record, my name is John Hansen, John, Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. Our farm is in Madison County. Our area of Northeast Nebraska was featured on the NBC program that Kurt Gowdy did years ago. It was my great uncle's farm. It was a huge operation. TV crews coming out into rural Nebraska was a big deal in the early 60s. But we had the pheasants, and we had the pheasants because we had the habitat. And we had not only soil banks, but we had a lot of tree lines. We had a lot of the plantings that came in with the shelter belts of the 30s. We also had weeds. And I would tell you that as I was the human dog, Senator Jacobson, and as we were picking corn and doing those things, it was my job to entertain all of the friends that we had. It's amazing how many friends you can have when you have a lot of pheasants. And that it was my job to help escort these folks around and do those things. But you could get toward the end of walking the cornfield where you have folks on the end. They're the blockers and hopefully the better shots. And then you have the folks on the wings, and then you have the folks in the middle. I was in the middle, but you could get amazingly close to the end of a lot of cornfields in those days, and you couldn't see whether or not you still had pheasants on the ground running ahead of you or not. And so all of a sudden there was a lot of excitement at the end of the walk. These days, with the herbicides that we have, when you look down to the end of the cornfield, you can see everybody because the ground is bare, because we've done a really good job of killing off all of the weeds, thanks to our herbicide programs. So we do a lot of things on our farm to try to help facilitate habitat, and I would say that it works. We have probably as good a hunting as anybody in our part of the neighborhood, a little better than most. But this issue of how do we go about trying to stimulate populations is one that I looked at when I was on the Lower Elkhorn NRD board. And so I was one of the early supporters of a program that we developed in that district, the Lands for Wildlife program, where we really aggressively tried to look at every piece of sort of rough or odd property that we could that had some habitat potential, where we could pay landowners an incentive to be able to plant grasses and feed sources in those areas, so that and give them an additional higher fee if they would allow public hunting. I think it was successful. It was successful enough that the Game and Parks picked it up. So if the state of Nebraska is going to get serious, in our view, about trying to grow pheasant populations, we have to get serious about growing habitat. And I would support this bill if I thought it would work, but I don't think it is going to work. If I were doing it and looking at a list of predators, I'd take coyotes off and I'd put feral cats on it. Feral cats have killed a lot more birds in my neighborhood than coyotes do. When you look at nesting pressure, the feral cats are just amazing hunters, and they're very, very good at finding nests for both eggs and young birds. So as we look at the list of options of things that our state can do, if we're going to really get serious on a statewide basis, in our view, we need to work with landowners and help incent them in order to provide more habitat. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. I can't imagine at this point in the hearing you'd have any.
Any
Thank
questions?
you.
Seeing none, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Next opponent, please.
Take him off list of cat lovers.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Joel Sartori, Joel Sartore. I appreciate the committee meeting on this bill. I speak in opposition to it for a number of reasons, but my family owns farm and ranch land around the state, including we partner with the Wilson family out near Lakeside in Senator Brewer's district. And I appreciate his fond memories of growing up with Husker football on the radio and pheasant hunting. I did that myself with my father starting in the late 60s, just to tag along. And then we pretty much had wrapped it up by the 90s because we could see that there were no more pheasants to hunt. Well, the reason was my father worked for Lilly, a division called Elanco, which made, pharmaceuticals for the agricultural industry. And it timed out just perfectly with the insecticides that are super good at eliminating insects. All birds feed their chicks insects. Without insects, you can have no young birds. Most people don't realize that, but insects are super important. Having these big blocks of habitat without any pesticides to kill the insects these birds must have to feed their chicks is a big deal. Big blocks of habitat with no chemical spraying, that is huge. I don't have much to say other than a couple just short pieces. I've worked on many stories for National Geographic over the years, and the tendency when I've done natural resources stories or natural history stories is to blame the predator. Sea lions were blamed for the death of the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, but it's complicated all the way from logging in the top of the watershed to netting out in the oceans to industrial runoff out in the oceans. It's not really the sea lions. They may be a little bitty symptom, but they're not the major thing. Blaming the predator is very typical, let's say in endangered species work, where I've sat in on meetings where a big committee of people, biologists mainly, are trying to decide where to release black-footed ferrets into a prairie dog town. We were specifically talking about one place in Montana. The guy with animal damage control from the federal government, whose job it is to eliminate coyotes, he says, kill them all. We got a great strategy for killing them all around this town. Whereas the coyote biologist, who got his PhD in coyote behavior, he says, actually, coyotes are super territorial. They're howling every night to determine whether there are other coyotes around. Their whole mission in life is to spread. He said, if you kill, then they're very dominant, the male and female, the alpha male and female, they're very dominant. They keep other coyotes away. You're going to have one family of coyotes there. You kill coyotes, especially the alphas, you're going to have every coyote from the neighborhood swarming that area you're trying to protect so hard. And they didn't listen to that guy, and they introduced black-footed ferrets, and they were all eaten by other things. So it's super important to follow the science. Certainly, there was a lot of good science presented today, and I too I'm in favor of the hunting tradition, of course, but it's got to be done in a smart way. And just for lower, as Senator Brandt mentioned, perhaps lowering the tax basis on on land to be used for conservation or leisure is a great place to start. And also mowing at the right time in state ditches. Mowing on state grounds when ground nesting birds aren't trying to pull off nests would be a big deal. Just delaying that mowing till they can fledge their young. Those would be big things. But I thank you for your time, and I won't belabor anybody else's points.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other opponents? Any other opponents wish to speak? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in neutral capacity on LB 400?
Good morning, Senator Bosselman, members of the Natural Resource Committee. My name is Bill Hawkins, Billhawkins. I'm a lifelong Nebraskan, and I grew up pheasant hunting. Pheasant hunting taught me gun safety, the early morning opening day of not being able to sleep the night before, anticipating going out into nature and hunting pheasants. My dad was a road hunter. He grew up road hunting, and it took me forever to get him to walk fields. No, Dad, I have permission to hunt in this field now. We can get out and hunt it. But his favorite parts of hunting were big giant piles of dead timber where the roosters were standing around. That, in reality, was the beginning of the loss of habitat. Those roosters had no other place to go. On a snowy, blizzardy day and walking to the end of a draw, a grassy draw, and coming up to the snow prints of the wings and tail of a rooster pheasant taking off, and that's all you saw. That was worth that walk out in the field. We are losing that. Our youth are not learning to go out in nature. Not everybody believes in hunting, but it gets you interested in nature. It taught me to track. It taught me responsibility with guns and weapons. Property owning, when you open a gate, you shut a gate. You get permission from the property owner, and you get to know those people. It's a community thing. I'm coming in here at a neutral position because I lost a good dog to trapping a long time ago. My other dogs kind of tore him apart trying to get him out of the trap. So I have some reservation about putting out 50,000 traps out in the state. So I would highly recommend, if we're going to do that, that we get good signage, we get good education. I appreciate Senator Brewer bringing this bill as a pheasant reestablishment act. We need to reestablish pheasants. We've had testimony pro and against this bill, a lot of science. And what we've heard is, number one, pheasants aren't natural to Nebraska. They were started releasing in the 1800s. It didn't work many times. It took many releases to establish pheasants. As the grain crops increased, the pheasant habit increased. I live out by Branched Oak Lake, north of town. I've lived out there for most of my life. At times during the 90s, I hunt by myself with a dog, and I would come up with flocks of hundreds of pheasants. Towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s, my buddy Jamie moved back. He was from Sidney, Nebraska, grew up a pheasant hunter, was highly successful in business, and he came back, settled around back Branched Oak, and had hundreds of acres of farmland. He kept track of his pheasants, and he would take 50 roosters a year or more. He was a hunter. He was cut short through pancreatic cancer, and passed away. But after he died, we had a huge winter, wiped out all the pheasants. I keep hearing about habitat. I live in habitat. There is habitat all over Branched Oak, but there is not one rooster pheasant and one hen pheasant per square mile anywhere around there. The Game and Parks throws out these rooster pheasants the day before a pheasant hunting, and I come across them. I don't hunt anymore because there's no pheasants, but you can almost walk up and touch those birds. Senator Brand had the best ideas that we have, and I highly recommend this committee amend Senator Brewer's bill, work with these other people. We have to release pheasants. We have the habitat in a lot of areas, but without additional birds, we cannot have what South Dakota has. So the incentive I'll finish my thought, is that Senator Brandt, an incentive for pollinator habitat plants and giving them a tax incentive would really help. This would be a multi-million-dollar benefit for this state to be like South Dakota. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Are any questions? Seeing none, thank you for coming in today for your testimony. Anyone else like to testify in neutral capacity? If you are going to testify yet, would you please move up to the front seat so we can continue moving?
I apologize.
Morning.
Morning. Michael Ryan, Michaelryan. I'm handing out a little document showing the faces of pheasants and predators. I think we need to summarize things as a whole. I've done a little research on pheasants. I grew pheasants since the age of 7. My dad is a farmer, and I've grown pheasants these last 2 years. You can buy pheasants for 50 cents a piece, and you can raise them. It's a great opportunity for anyone in the state of Nebraska to learn how to respect wildlife and to put forth hunting. Hunting is a great, great, great thing, but so is conservation. Please look at these pictures while I'm speaking with you. I attended 7 Pheasants Forever meetings, across the country, and each one of them I went to, I asked the president or the local chapter director if anyone was raising pheasants. Not a single one of these chapters at Pheasants Forever was raising pheasants. That seems counterintuitive to me. Pheasants are easy to raise. Pheasants are easy to raise if you know what you're doing and you have the education and the resources. It's just a matter of doing it. One solution that I see is not just shooting coyotes, but also starting in each county. Each county in Nebraska could have a central distribution site of eggs. Eggs are really simple to have, and you can distribute them to each of the high schools. They could be making pheasants, releasing them. That's one way to save money. I also talked to the president of Pheasants Forever. And again, he told me our business model is not releasing pheasants. Our business model is making money. And from seeing these Pheasants Forever meetings, it is just guys getting together, paying $100 for a ticket, and trying to walk away with a free gun. Yes, there's a little bit of camaraderie, but it's also, they're making money. I've spoken with the Nebraska Game and Parks Department and asked them if they were willing to have pheasants or to start a pheasant program. This was during a period when I was trying to write a grant for the Nebraska Environmental Trust. The Nebraska Game and Parks Department had no interest in doing pheasants because they just seemed to find a way to explain the situation away. And I don't think that's right. I easily see that we could grow the pheasant population. Pheasants really enjoy wooded areas. Pheasants roost in cottonwood trees. There's all kinds of shelter belts. There's all kinds of naturally forming trees within agricultural land that could be utilized for these pheasant rehabilitation areas. LB 400 does not address the entirety of what could be done, but I think we should applaud Mr. Brewer for bringing it to our attention. I have tried for the last 5 years to get pheasants more popularized and more just to catch on in Nebraska. Like, it needs to be a fad again. Like the youth need to respect and see these birds. And there's so many learning opportunities that come from handling a gun, from walking outside, from being with other guys and drinking coffee and cooking a pheasant on a fry pan. Like, the state of Nebraska could be doing so much more if we just started small, take small steps with pheasants. One idea that I had for the bounty program is we shouldn't be letting just anybody go out and shoot these pheasants, shoot the coyotes. There are, I thought maybe the National Guard. You should have soldiers or employees with the National Guard who have PTSD or anyone with the National Guard to go out there and shoot these pheasants. You're giving people something to do that's constructive. And it's not just a matter of these drunken fools on weekends who go out there in 4x4s and blast away at 30 coyotes. I have seen that firsthand. There's a right way and a wrong way to eliminate a pest, and there's a right way and a wrong way to grow something that has implications for the economy of Nebraska. One other solution that we were talking about was buffer strips. All the land in Nebraska, most of the land has pivots, so it's a round corner. So it's all marked out in squares. So on the outside corners, there's opportunity to plant different crops. We currently have 6 Pheasants Forever corners on our land. We have about 80 acres of natural prairie grasses, switchgrass, Indian grass, you name it. I've seen pheasants, they can survive in Nebraska. You just got to give them an opportunity and you got to give them food. Milo, sorghum, I think on those corners, if we planted more sorghum, that would be a great thing. County roads, county owns a road up to 30 feet. If we would just plant Milo right next to the roads, you would have a lot more pheasants just like they do in South Dakota. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else would like to testify in the neutral capacity on LB 400? Anyone else like to testify in neutral capacity? That I invite Senator Brewer up. For the record, we did receive 8 proponent and 11 opponent letters.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where do I begin? First off, Senator Brandt, I think you do have a good idea. Understand that when you write one of these bills, the bigger and the more complicated you make it, the more impossible it becomes to pass. So what I was trying to do is figure out a way of just moving toward right without trying to do it in one bill. It has been revealing. And in that part of it, I guess I'm a little disappointed in the fact that Game and Parks had plenty of opportunity to come in and speak to me. Show me these studies that they have. They never did it. Neither did Pheasants Forever. So I'll look forward to getting those. But I just sent a text to my LA to say, add me to Ergman's bill to move Game and Parks to Sydney. Because if their purpose was to piss me off, they've managed to do it. Because that ain't right. Come in and talk about these things. Figure out how to get to a solution. Don't ambush people in a hearing. I'll have that conversation one-on-one with Tim McCoy when this is over. But back to the point at hand here. I don't have a problem with moving that time period that we hunt the predators. I agree. We shift that. That's an amendment. That isn't an ambush on the bill. Getting youth involved. That's one of the things that I've tried to stress through this bill and part of what I wanted to do out of this. There are plenty of naysayers that came in here. The fact that they're going to say, well, if you use any of our money from our general funds, then we lose millions of federal dollars. Could be. That's why I said we may have to look at taking this money out of our general fund from the legislature. Again, that should not be the reason that we don't do it because of a issue that Game and Parks has with where that money comes from. Is it the right thing to do? There will be a point where it's a loss for Game and Parks. If there's nobody that can find a pheasant, they're not going to be behind pheasant license. Okay, so they'll fix the problems themselves if they continue to drive this thing in the ground. Now, the last testifier was very revealing because I have from a distance looked at Pheasants Forever and what their mission in life is and where they release pheasants. So I'm going to look a lot closer in the future. But if Game and Parks isn't out releasing pheasants, except just before a youth hunt or something like that, and nobody else is out releasing pheasants, and we continue to have the predator props, I text the rancher who originally approached me with this and said, "Hey, how many coyotes have you killed?" And he said, "Since the first freeze on the 16th day of October, I've killed 127 coyotes." Now, you can tell me the coyotes don't eat pheasants. First off, I think you're full of it. I think they eat plenty of pheasants, just as coons and everything else does. And if there's spots in Senator Salama's district where you can shine a light at night and find 20 sets of eyes, I guarantee you those coons are never going to let a pheasant live anywhere near there. So you can say what you want about hunting predators, but that's still a part of it. Now, are there other pieces we could put together to make this thing work? You betcha there is. And I'm open to it. But as we make this more and more complicated, if we want to give tax breaks to landowners, holy cow, you open up a whole new can of worms there. So let's not forget that we could amend this, have a limited solution that gets us closer to, again, having pheasants somewhere in Nebraska without totally scrubbing the whole thing. And I would look forward to the studies from those who said that they have them. That is all I have for my closing, subject to your questions.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for bringing LB 400. Give you a break and then we'll start on LB 450 in a couple minutes.
We should have gone 3 minutes. After 1 or 2, you kind of get the idea of what's trending. Is this actually going to be a very tested investor?
He might.
How often do you get out pheasant hunting? How often do you get out pheasant hunting?
Oh, probably.
Okay, now we'll begin with opening on LB 450. Welcome, Senator Brewer.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman, and good afternoon, fellow senators. Sorry, it ain't quite afternoon yet. Good morning. Fellow senators of Natural Resources Committee, I'm Senator Tom Brewer. For the record, that's TOM-BREWER, and I represent 11 counties, the 43rd Legislative District of Western Nebraska. I'm here today to introduce LB 450. I'm introducing this bill on behalf of my constituents that ask for it. This will be a short introduction because, quite frankly, it's a very short bill. It only reads one sentence. The sentence is, this bill bans wind turbine blade landfills in Nebraska. We're blessed here to have the fresh, best water in the world, I feel. And I need you just for a moment, imagine if you filtered that water of the Ogallala Aquifer down through thousands of tons of chopped up fiberglass, epoxy resin, different industrial toxic adhesives. This is what industrial wind blades are made of. And just one of these blades can be up to 50 tons. So the idea that we would bury them here in Nebraska, and so everyone understands where this came from was a year ago, we got pictures from a mound of wind blades that had come out of Colorado that were being stacked south of Sidney, Nebraska. And some of the landowners had contacted me and say, hey, can they bury them here? And we came to find out that there was no rules against it. So that's what generated this bill. What happened with wind energy is they took off about 2010, and it went, I guess what you call wild for a while there. There was a lot of wind towers put up. But what also comes with that is a life on the blades, 10, 15 years. And that life is now coming full cycle. Some of the other places where it took off sooner, like Colorado, they're already in the lifespan of those blades and they're being replaced. So in trying to research this, what we did find out is that Wyoming actually takes the blades. They have the ability to use their mines, coal mines, I think is the primary one, and they use them as a backfill into those mines. And so there are options of places you can take the blades. The issue with this bill is that you simply do not bury them here in Nebraska. With that, I will be open to take questions.
Questions from committee members? Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Brewer. Do other states, I mean, clearly Wyoming is not preventing it. Have other states done something like this as well?
Yes, I can't roll off all the states. I know that what they have tried to do in other places is figure out ways of cutting them up and then using components. They've had kind of limited success with that. So, you know, it is a constant because they are so big and take up so much space. What do you do with them? And it's part of the whole decommissioning of anything that has to do with wind energy.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brewer, I apologize for being out for party open, so if I ask a redundant question, forgive me, but what are these blades made out of?
Well, run back over that. They're, of course, fiberglass is the main component. There is a little bit of metal, but primarily it's epoxy resin that's in them. And yeah, that's the major components of them.
I mean, you and I think, share the concern about, I'm still scratching my head on this whole wind energy push. And if it weren't for the tax credits, we'd probably do away with the problem, having to dispose of them because there wouldn't be any put up. So I share your concern on the disposal. And obviously when you're looking at restrictions on other types of materials that can be dumped into landfills, this is another thing that we really don't want to be seeing out there, causing another problem down the road in addition to the one we have when they're up and working. So at any rate, thanks for bringing them.
And keep in mind that, like I was said, that part of the reason is the calls from the landowners that saw the blades being stacked. Of course, these are Colorado blades. So the fear is that we may end up not a product that's from the wind towers built in Nebraska, but from other places. And in Wyoming, they can go down to either a rock base or a clay base with rock under it to put things where it basically holds it, where ours is an aquifer where it drains through.
Exactly. Now that's my concern is I don't want to see anything additional out there that's going to create a contamination issue. And, you know, I guess maybe you can increase the tax credit enough to pay for the disposal as well.
Other questions? Seeing none, stay for closing?
I'm staying.
Thank you. Any proponent for LB 450, please step forward.
Good morning, Chairman Bosselman, members of the Natural Resource Committee. My name is Bill Hawkins, Billhawkins. As I stated before, I'm a lifelong Nebraska resident. I live on one of the highest hills just north of Lincoln by Branched Oak Lake. I've lived there most of my life. I am about as big a environmentalist as there is. I've worn out 4 teepees in my life. I've chosen to live here in the state of Nebraska doing living history for kids. I live outside. And as I stated, I live on one of the highest hills out here so I have 360-degree view of the great state of Nebraska. And as an environmentalist for a long, long time, it would be surprising to find that I am opposed to giant wind farms in the state of Nebraska that ship power to another state and destroy our way of life. If a local community wants to have a sustainable energy source with a group of solar panels and a windmill farm, that's great. The citizens decide that. But to cover our sand hills with windmills that aren't green because we have this disposal problem of the blades, toxic blades, we have a tremendous amount of energy that it takes to drive those windmills. And then at the end, we leave a chunk of concrete in the ground that is 80 cement truckloads. So we never talk about conservation. If somebody comes in opposition to this bill of taking other states' used giant blades to bury in our state, it's like out at Meade, where we took all the toxic seed corn. We cannot be the dumping ground for the nation. So I appreciate Senator Brewer addressing this issue. We need to really look at a sustainable energy source that benefits Nebraskans and not some foreign company or another state. I really believe in the great state of Nebraska, or I wouldn't still be here. But if I have my 360-degree view destroyed by a massive wind farm, I'm not going to be very happy, and it's going to ruin my way of life. I think we need to conserve more energy in our country rather than subsidize, as Senator Jacobson pointed out, this wind industry that claims to be green. And so as I am the only proponent of this, then I assume the people behind me are opponents. And I can't see how anybody from even the Sierra Club or anywhere else would come and be opposed to burying toxic wind blades in our great state. And so I would appreciate this committee supporting this bill of Senator Brewer's and other bills that he brings back to address a sustainable energy source for Nebraska. So I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from committee members? Seeing none,
Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Other proponents for LB 450, please step forward. Any proponents? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in opposition to LB 450, please step forward.
Good morning again,
morning
Senator
again.
Bossman, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Al Davis, ALDAVIS, and I am the registered lobbyist for the 3,000 members of the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club here today in opposition to LB 450. As always, we appreciate the structure of the Nebraska unicameral, which gives every bill a hearing and allows us to share our thoughts and opinions with each of you and our fellow Nebraskans. And as you might expect, the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club opposes this bill. LB 450 is a solution in search of a problem. Currently, no turbine blades are being placed in landfills according to the fiscal notes supplied on the legislative website. But the statement of intent implies that dangerous chemicals coming from these blades will leach through the landfill liners and contaminate the water table if they are placed within the landfill. This is a very speculative claim. The turbine industry is a legal industry. It contributes millions of dollars in taxes to counties and school districts across Nebraska, employs dozens of Nebraskans, has placed millions of dollars of disposable income in the hands of farmers and ranchers, and has provided cheap energy. Sorry, I lost my place. And contributed to reduced electrical rates across the state. Turbines contribute to the grid by providing cheap energy and have been quite useful when conventional systems fail, as happened recently in Omaha when an ice jam on the Missouri shut down a coal plant for a time. In addition, the wind turbine industry has contributed significantly to efforts to reduce climate change. There are very few industries which contribute less to the degradation of our natural resources than the turbine industry, which is misunderstood on multiple levels. The legislature has many important issues to address, and this is not one of them, and the bill should be killed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman, members of the Natural Resources Committee, my name is Richard Lombardi. I'm the registered lobbyist for a group called the Advanced Power Alliance. We're a regional trade association of developers, financiers, builders, operators of wind, solar, and battery technologies. Our footprint is the Great Plains, and we, on the back of my statement here are a list of the companies of whom make up the membership of the organization I'm testifying on behalf. Quite simply, LB 450 proposes to make an activity of commerce illegal. If you're doing business in this state, we all utilize solid waste.
Mr. Lombardi, sorry, could you spell your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator. Richard Lombardi, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, Lombardi, L-O-M-B-A-R-D-I. The wind energy industry is based upon conservation of resources. And it has been one of the huge success stories in this state, and the rapid growth of it, the robust nature of this. Just kind of ticking off just a couple of stats. Wind, solar, battery development, it's a $6 billion investment in this state. Over 2,500 people employed in very high and good paying jobs. We save 2 billion gallons of water. We provide a fixed cost resource which guarantees the fact that rates will stay considerably lower from that resource. 30% of the electricity generating these lights, probably a little more because we're in Lincoln, comes from renewable energy. I have included here, solid waste is a huge issue, no doubt about it. If you take a look at the chart I gave you, this puts this issue in context with the solid waste that everybody has to wrestle with landfills. And as you can see, we're talking about a really insignificant amount from a volume standpoint. Now, having said this, the clean wind energy, there's 8,000 parts in a wind turbine. 90% of those are currently recycled. And the issue that we're talking about today has been a vexing one, because these turbine blades are built with polymers, as Senator Brewer has indicated, fiberglass. These are non-toxic elements. I mean, you dispose of fiberglass already in your landfills. Now, having said this, our industry doesn't get satisfied until we have developed a solution for all of it. And that's why I have accompanied this with you with two companies that are doing work in this area. One's in Oklahoma and one's in Tennessee. And this is a very exciting thing that is developing, and that a lot of technological, two different companies. Interestingly enough, the company in Tennessee is using pyrolysis, which I think this committee's heard about with regard to the Hallam plant, with regard to hydrogen production, but it's a intense fire breakdown in an oxygen devoid environment. And the other one has some construction aspects of how they do that. Anyhow, those are two sheets on things that are going on that I suspect will have a tremendous impact to increase the amount of recycling. But at the end of the day, this bill strictly makes a legal commerce activity illegal, and therefore our industry opposes it.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions, Senator Hughes?
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thanks for coming in.
Sure, Senator.
I have two questions. One, I think this bill just says we can't bury them in landfills. It wouldn't, I don't think how it's read, would stop someone from coming and doing recycling of them. But my bigger question is, why do the blades only last 20 years? Can you just walk me through the process of why we have to decommission them, to me, so soon after they've gone?
Right. The numbers go from 20 to 30 years. I think there's a couple of aspects. One, most recently, there's been some new designs. There's a lot of repowering going on within the industry. So there's new designs that are more efficient, that are with some of the designs of the polymers and that. They get pelted pretty bad. I mean, I've seen some of the blades after a lot of use. So it's a very intense converting kinetic to mechanical energy, and those blades undergo everything that the elements have on it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Nope.
Okay, Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman. You indicate that we cannot restrict this going into landfills, but yet we restrict other products from going into landfills today. So why would this be illegal to restrict, but yet tires and batteries can be legal to restrict?
Right.
What's your rationale on that?
Well, I'm suggesting that a product that is made out of the same products that a turbine blade is being treated differently than a turbine blade would be.
So everything that's made up in that, in the polymers and it's
drywall,
so,
I mean, it's just different construction waste. But having said that, obviously we have an industry that is totally committed to the environment, and I think progress is being made. And I wanted to give you a couple of examples on the recycling side. But at the end of the day, this is a bill that basically takes an activity of commerce that is essential, and says that you're not allowed to have access to.
and it's what's essential about this.
Well, I think that everybody has a solid waste disposal. We have laws to govern that, and that this proposal specifically looks at our particular industry and seeks to treat it differently than other products.
I do have one other question. I hear about how this is renewable and how green it is and how important it is to our industry. But when you start looking at the cost to build them, the cost to transport them, the cost to maintain them, the oil that gets spilled, keeping them lubricated, and all of this, if you took away the tax credits, how many of these would be built?
What's kind of spurious about these arguments on tax credits is that every energy source coal-fired plants, the nuclear plants, every energy source has a level of subsidy to
That
it.
was my question. I want to know how many of these would be built without tax credits.
Well, I think that, I don't know.
Would zero be a pretty good number?
No, I don't think so.
Would it be close?
No. I think that, there are a lot of folks that have had to make decisions in the business of utility scale on renewable energy and have found it to be a valuable investment. And I think that it's, in the last COVID, in the last 3 years, wind has grown in the state by 30%, solar has grown by 50%. People are going to find this.
I understand that, and I don't want to get off topic
Yeah.
here either, but,
Okay.
but obviously there's reasons it's growing, and I think tax credits is the biggest reason for it. And so I'm just looking at when you start looking at cost of producing energy, wind is one of the highest cost to produce wind energy today. Fossil fuels are actually water, hydrogen are. Hydro is the cheapest, and obviously what we're using with fossil fuels today is very inexpensive, and the costs have actually gone up. But I'm off topic on that, but I just, I
I'd be
continue
happy
to
to
look
provide
at
you
that.
the factual, but.
I've got the facts. I can look at
okay.
yours as well, but thank you.
So I believe what Senator Brewer is talking about here is what they're seeing of blades coming in from other states being on people's land and then potentially going into landfills. Your comment is 90-some% of those recycled.
90% of the 8,000 parts that make up a wind turbine are currently recycled and
Can be
repurposed.
recycled, right?
Yes.
So in Butler County, we have Butler County landfill. And earlier, a couple of years ago, they attempted to receive and bring in turbine blades to the landfill. The landfill right now is meeting capacity. The landfill right now is taking waste from a large area in multiple states, which is part of the process they're going through if they're going to seek a new permit or not. But where I'm going with this is they attempted to do turbine blades, and what happened is it broke their equipment. They put it into their crusher and it shattered their equipment. So they're like, this isn't good. We don't have the space in the landfill. I think maybe what Senator Brewer is saying is these take up a large area. So I guess if these blades can be recycled or parts can be recycled, and we have problems with our landfills receiving them because they have limited space, and we want that space we're trying to keep for some of the other household needs that we have, because it is difficult to open up new landfills. I'm not sure why that his bill wouldn't be appropriate in the sense that just trying to save that space, and if we can recycle them, then I don't see where the issue would be.
I think that each landfill, as I understand too, Senator, is that they get to decide what they can put in there and what they can't. But that's a decision at that juncture. I don't know, there's a bunch of different scenarios. When I take a look at the companies that are developing the solution to recycling, they seem to be having wrestled with that exact point that you talked to. This company out of Oklahoma, I think, has developed the next iteration of how to deal with that. There may be a need in the future for temporary, or there also may be a business opportunity with landfills and these new technologies to process and utilize in the central location of Nebraska and its transportation advantages and being in the heart of the wind belt. There may be opportunities here in the future, but I wanted to share with you, I think, kind of the progress of the recycling side here.
So it's in its infancy. So we do have a large number of turbine blades coming in from other states, and when we have another state next door, Wyoming specifically, that will take them and putting them into their mines that they have that does have the either bedrock or clay formations underneath there, where they will take them and they've got room to put them in. I guess it kind of seems to make a little sense that we encourage that in a way.
One of the things I've noticed about this industry is that the market really drives it. And I think that that's what we're seeing as we see the development of the recycling. But making specific, targeting a specific industry and saying that your solid waste is prohibited from coming in here, I just don't think that's a particularly
I
positive policy.
I appreciate your testimony. I think Senator Jacobson kind of made the point that we already have a lot of products that we don't allow in landfill specifically for certain reasons. But I thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Senator.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
Next opponent, please. Still good morning.
It's still good morning, just barely. Chairman Bosselman, members of the committee, again, for the record, my name is John Hansen, John Hansen, Hansen. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. This topic, I think Rich Lombardi did a good job of saying that it was a bit of a vexing challenge because the wind industry does want to make the case that they are a very green and they work hard at being able to repurpose and reuse and recycle the rest of the components. But obviously the blades are a large item. They're also made of balsa wood along with other things. And so as you look at these blades, what do we do with them? We need, I think, a better solution. What I would suggest is that the committee take a look at doing a study of this issue. Our organization has been involved in development of renewable energy because it is value added and it does bring new and additional tax base and revenue to agriculture and rural communities. But our state, despite our urging and our efforts, has not been competitive relative to going after a lot of the good manufacturing jobs that are tied to this industry. So we don't have a wind turbine manufacturing plant here. We don't have wind turbine plants. We don't have a lot of the component parts in our state that other states do because they've strategically gone after those businesses. And in addition to the two states that have businesses that are working on this issue, Missouri also has a facility that is in this process. And the thought struck me is that we're going to have a lot of blades coming on down the road in 15 or 20 years. Maybe if Nebraska can't be at the forefront of creating manufacturing jobs for building them, maybe we could try to recruit businesses that successfully repurpose them and recycle them. So I think there's a business opportunity here that I think would make some good sense for our state to do. And we support the wind industry and the solar industry. From our perspective, we are harvesting our sunshine and our wind resources in an economically and environmentally responsible way. And we're using tax incentives to do that. And yes, we're also doing tax incentives called the oil depletion allowance, even though the oil industry is a mature industry. And those things that we used at the beginning in order to help incent that industry are still in place. And evolved incentives, and we've looked at incentives from that standpoint, Senator Jacobson, and the biggest single subsidy that exists in the energy world today, in our view, is the unaccounted for costs of carbon emissions. And they are not accounted for in the cost equation. And oil and coal are producing carbon emissions that are having very substantial impacts on our climate and our weather. And our state is now receiving, unfortunately, the brunt and the impact of those kinds of events. We're having more and more intensity, size, and frequency of extreme weather events. And NOAA has been putting that data out there for some time. And we've been highlighting that data. So there is a good purpose for having this industry in our state. And I really do hope we find a better solution for the blades than burying them.
Okay.
Thank you.
For your testimony, Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for coming, Mr. Hanson. So this bill says specifically, we don't want them buried in Nebraska. We don't want them becoming a dumping ground for all the blades in Iowa. When they decommission, bring them down. And you are saying, what if we would focus on, since we're not going to build them here, we haven't jumped onto that bandwagon, let's jump onto the bandwagon of decommissioning them, shredding them, whatever. Wouldn't this bill encourage that? Because we're not going to let them be buried, the whole thing buried underground, but that would help lend to, let's be more creative and shred them up like I've heard can be done, things like that.
Yeah,
Because the easy thing to do, right, would be just to bury them. Like, don't do anything with them, dump them in the ground.
well, I as of right now, given the technology that we have, I think that's certainly
Right.
one of the options. And, you know, our organization has had a long-standing and complicated relationship with what we consider not so dormant portion of the Dormant Commerce Clause. And so as we've tried to do certain things at the state level that have run into the Commerce Clause, and so the issue of the out-of-state blades coming into our state, it would be an interesting question to ask the Attorney General whether or not we could in fact differentiate between out-of-state blades and in-state blades. I suspect that the Dormant Commerce Clause would cause us problems relative to that differentiation, which from a public policy standpoint, we would support. We like the idea of every state being more or less responsible for cleaning up their own messes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? It is interesting when you talk about recycling. I actually had a bill, and all the opponents that came to oppose this bill opposed my bill, and it was about recycling the turbine blades and the turbines, all of it, and taking the concrete out of the ground, because we did a study in all the surrounding states. And at the time, you made money when it depended upon which state you were in. If you recycled, decommissioned that turbine and recycled it, which showed that those companies actually made a profit off of that. And that bill, when I had it, I don't remember the bill number, but that was strongly opposed. So, you know, I think Senator Brewer's got an arguable point here with what are we going to do with turbine blades or turbine parts, because I've tried to look at that decommissioning and recycling. And our study did show that you could do that, but then it was opposed significantly. So with that, thank you for your testimony.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to the committee.
Any other opponents to LB 450? Anyone like to testify in the neutral capacity? With that, Senator Brewer, you're welcome to close.
All right, we'll cut through some of the chatter here on those that testified. First off, a study is simply a way of moving this to the right so it doesn't happen. So don't let that one fool you. And then I want you to just take a deep breath for a moment and think about this. You had the Sierra Club come up here and tell you it's a good idea to bury wind turbine blades in Nebraska. I'm sorry. I don't care how you twist that. There is something fundamentally wrong with that. If the Sierra Club is truly doing what their mission statement is, and I'll gladly read it to you if you want it, and then they want to come up here and testify in favor of burying wind blades, I don't even know what else to say. It's like Pheasants Forever not wanting to put any pheasants out in the wild. That's how insane it is. Now, the usual three musketeers that come anytime there's a wind bill have been here. And you know, we can talk about wind blades and the life of them. The thing that you need to remember is we've got hundreds of wind towers in Nebraska, and a lot of them have been there for quite a while. Their life is going to be up pretty soon, or in some cases they already are. And we went out to Wyoming to talk to the recycle folks. They said that the blades can range from 5 years to 15 years in a normal life. So to think of 20 and 30, I think is stretching the limits. Now, do they get banged up? They do. They get banged up from hitting eagles. They get banged up from hitting hawks and all these birds that are out there nobody wants to talk about, because wind is great and it's wonderful for the environment. So when it comes down to the bottom line, what you guys need to decide is, do we want to bury thousands of tons of chopped up wind turbine blades in Nebraska with our aquifer or not? That's simply what the bill does. It's not complicated. And if you can take the fact that these guys are paid guns by the wind companies to come in and tell you how bad idea it is to do that and use that as a reason not to, then that's where you are. But common sense, and I think logic, people in Nebraska are going to say this is not something we should do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions from committee? Sir Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Busselman. I apologize, Senator Brewer. I was introducing on the bill. You just made me think one thing. So I missed the intro. Are there leaching chemicals in wind turbine blades that we're worried about getting into the aquifer?
Well, I would assume that anything that is made of mixed up chemicals can then change back into its original state if it sets in an environment where it's exposed to moisture and decay. I would imagine there's going to be all kinds of things that come out of them. I don't know what that would be, other than the fact that, you know, you've got the known things that are in a wind blade.
Well, we don't need to rehash now. It made me think of that. So I'll ask other folks afterwards, so I don't have to drag this out for everybody. But I appreciate the bill, and I'll think about it. And maybe I'll ask you later.
Senator Salama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on Senator Kavanaugh's question, to confirm, there are chemicals like epoxy, plastics included in these wind turbine blades that, when buried, would leach into the soil. So that's just what the composition of the windmill blades are, and stands to reason that same leaching would occur. That's all.
You mentioned that there was I think an article in the paper or pictures of what you saw. Was it in Scottsbluff for that? Could you?
Sydney,
could you provide the committee with those?
Sure.
At some point? Okay. With that, there's no other questions. That will close our hearing on LB 450. Thank you everyone for coming today. We'll see you this afternoon.